A shot rang out across the moonlit plains of Sweetwater Creek, Colorado, the year 1876. As Harriet Jenkins ducked behind the overturned stagecoach, her heart pounding like a stampeding herd against her ribcage. It wasn't supposed to be like this. A simple journey to start a new life as a schoolteacher turned into a nightmare of flying bullets and desperate screams. "Hand over the strongbox," a gruff voice demanded from the darkness, followed by another shot that splintered wood mere inches from Harriet's face. The stagecoach driver lay motionless on the ground, the guard clutching a bleeding arm. Two passengers, an elderly couple who had kindly shared their provisions with Harriet during the journey, cowered on the opposite side of the coach. "We don't have anything worth dying for," the old man called out, his voice trembling. "Take what you want." Harriet pressed herself against the coach's undercarriage, the dust of the trail clinging to her cheeks, mixing with silent tears. The blue calico dress she had sewn specially for her arrival in Sweetwater Creek was now smeared with dirt and sagebrush stains. 22 years old and alone in the world since her parents' passing last winter, she had invested every penny of her inheritance in this westward journey, carrying nothing but a small trunk of belongings and dreams as vast as the territory itself. The bandits, 3 of them, from what she could glimpse, approached on horseback, their faces obscured by bandanas, moonlight glinting off their revolvers. "Check the passengers," ordered the largest one, clearly their leader. "And don't be gentle about it." Harriet's breath caught in her throat. The books she had read about the Wild West had romanticized the danger, made it seem like an adventure. There was nothing romantic about the terror paralyzing her limbs now. One bandit dismounted, yanking the elderly woman to her feet, roughly searching her for valuables. The woman's terrified sobs pierced the night air. "Leave her alone!" Harriet found herself shouting, standing on wobbly legs before her brain could advise caution. The bandit's attention snapped toward her, eyes narrowing beneath his hat brim. "Well, look what we got here, boys." A little schoolmarm with some spirit. He stalked toward her, and Harriet backed away, suddenly aware of her foolishness. But she couldn't bear to watch them terrorize an innocent old woman. "I don't have anything valuable," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just books and clothing." "We'll be the judge of what's valuable," he sneered, reaching for her arm. Harriet jerked away, but his fingers tangled in her sleeve. She pulled harder, heard the fabric tear, and stumbled backward. The bandit lunged, catching her dress at the shoulder. She twisted, heard another rip as the bodice tore across the neckline and down one side, exposing her chemise underneath. Humiliation burned hotter than fear as she clutched at the torn fabric, trying to cover herself. The bandit's laughter echoed in the night. "Maybe we should take more than just valuables," the leader called from his horse, spurring the animal closer. That's when the first shot came, not from the bandits, but from somewhere in the darkness beyond. One of the outlaws cried out, clutching his arm, his gun falling to the dust. "What the?" The leader wheeled his horse around, scanning the shadows. 2 more shots in rapid succession, precise and controlled. One struck the dirt at the leader's horse's hooves, causing the animal to rear. Another pinged off the metal frame of the stagecoach, inches from the 3rd bandit's head. "Whoever's out there has a clear shot at all of you," called a deep voice from the darkness. "I suggest you ride out while you still can." The bandits exchanged glances, the leader cursing under his breath. "This ain't worth dying over," muttered the one who'd torn Harriet's dress, backing toward his horse. The leader glared into the darkness, then at Harriet, as if memorizing her face. "We'll meet again," he threatened before wheeling his horse around. "Let's go." The 3 outlaws galloped away, dust clouds billowing behind them as they disappeared into the night. Harriet stood frozen, still clutching the torn fabric of her dress, her body trembling with the aftermath of fear. The elderly couple huddled together, the woman sobbing quietly against her husband's chest. From the shadows emerged their savior, a tall figure leading a chestnut mare. As he stepped into the moonlight, Harriet could make out a weathered Stetson hat, broad shoulders, and a rifle held with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "Everyone all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now, eyes scanning the scene before settling on Harriet. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a face tanned and lined from years under the sun. A faded blue bandana circled his neck, and his denim jacket was dusty from the trail. But it was his eyes that caught Harriet's attention, keen and alert, yet somehow kind beneath the brim of his hat. He approached her slowly as one might a spooked horse. "Madam," he said, noticing her desperate attempt to hold her torn dress together. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. "You're safe now." The simple words, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke something in Harriet. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, and she clutched the jacket around her, grateful for both the covering and the kindness. "Thank you," she managed, voice barely above a whisper. "Name's Wyatt Jackson," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Was camping just over that ridge when I heard the commotion." He glanced toward the injured guard. "Let's see to the wounded, then get you folks somewhere safe." As he moved to check on the guard, Harriet pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. It smelled of leather, horses, and wood smoke, scents foreign to her Eastern upbringing, but somehow comforting in this moment. The stagecoach driver, she discovered with relief, wasn't dead but unconscious from a blow to the head. The guard's arm wound was bloody but not life-threatening. "Sweetwater Creek's not far," Wyatt said, helping the dazed driver to sit up. "But we can't move this coach tonight with the horses gone." The bandits had cut the team loose, and the horses had scattered. "What will we do?" asked the elderly woman, her voice quavering. "My camp's not far. You can rest there tonight and I'll ride into town at first light for help." Wyatt's eyes found Harriet's again. "Think you can manage a short ride, miss?" "Jenkins, Harriet Jenkins," she supplied, suddenly conscious of how she must look, hair falling from its pins, face tear-streaked and dusty. "And yes, I believe I can." Wyatt nodded, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You showed courage standing up to those men." "Or foolishness," she replied, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Out here, sometimes there's little difference between the two." With efficiency born of experience, Wyatt organized their small group. The driver, though groggy, could walk with assistance. The guard's arm was bandaged with strips torn from Harriet's petticoat offered after she'd stepped behind the stagecoach for privacy. The elderly couple, the Hendersons, she learned would ride double on Wyatt's mare. "Miss Jenkins can ride with me," Wyatt decided, adjusting the stirrups on his horse. Before she could protest the impropriety, he added quietly, "It's only half a mile and you look dead on your feet." Harriet couldn't argue with that assessment. The night's events had drained her completely. Still wearing his jacket over her torn dress, she allowed him to help her onto the horse before he swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back should have scandalized her, would have, in her previous life in Pennsylvania, but here, with the vast Colorado night surrounding them and danger only recently departed, it felt like security. As they rode toward Wyatt's camp, Harriet Jenkins had no way of knowing that this night, terrible as it had been, marked the beginning of a story far greater than any she had packed in her trunk of books, a story of her own. The camp was simple but well organized, a small fire burning low in a ring of stones, a canvas lean-to pitched against a stand of pine trees, and supplies neatly stowed under oilcloth. Wyatt helped Harriet down from the horse with strong, sure hands, then immediately set about making the others comfortable. "It's not much," he apologized, stoking the fire to life, "but it's dry and the coffee's hot." Despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs, Harriet found herself pitching in, helping Mrs. Henderson settle onto a bedroll while Wyatt tended to the injured guard. There was something soothing about having tasks to complete, practical matters to attend to rather than dwelling on the night's terrors. "You're the new school teacher, aren't you?" Mrs. Henderson asked, gratefully accepting a tin cup of coffee from Harriet. "Yes," Harriet confirmed, settling beside the older woman. "I'm to start when the new schoolhouse is finished. Have you lived in Sweetwater Creek long?" "All my life, child. Born in a cabin not 5 miles from where the town stands now." Pride colored her voice. "My Harold and I were visiting our daughter in Denver. First time I've left the county in 20 years. "Some homecoming," Harold muttered, but patted his wife's hand affectionately. Across the fire, Wyatt moved with the quiet efficiency Harriet was beginning to associate with him, checking the driver for signs of serious injury, re-bandaging the guard's arm. He spoke little, but his actions communicated competence and care. When all immediate needs were seen to, he approached Harriet, crouching down beside her. "You all right?" he asked, voice pitched low for her ears alone. The genuine concern in his eyes touched something in her that threatened more tears. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Thanks to you." "Your dress," he began, then seemed to catch himself. "I have a spare shirt in my pack if you'd prefer it to my jacket." The reminder of her torn clothing brought heat to Harriet's cheeks, but she appreciated his matter-of-fact approach. "The jacket is fine for now, thank you." His eyes lingered on her face a moment longer, as if assessing the truth of her words, then he nodded and stood. "Try to get some rest. I'll keep watch." "Don't you need sleep too?" she found herself asking. A slight smile curved his lips. "Used to riding night herd." "Besides," he added, his expression growing serious again, "those men might circle back when they've nursed their wounded pride." The thought sent a chill through Harriet that had nothing to do with the night air. "But don't you worry," Wyatt continued, seeing her reaction. "They're cowards at heart, and cowards rarely return to face a man with a steady aim." Despite his reassurance, Harriet noticed he kept his rifle close as he settled on a fallen log at the edge of the firelight, his posture relaxed but alert, eyes scanning the darkness beyond. Sleep seemed impossible after everything that had happened, yet exhaustion soon won out. Wrapped in Wyatt's jacket and a wool blanket he'd insisted she take, Harriet drifted off to the gentle crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl. Dreams came in fragmented bursts, the bandits' fingers tearing at her dress, the terror in Mrs. Henderson's eyes, the crack of gunfire. But threaded through these nightmares was a new element. A steady presence, the weight of a jacket on her shoulders, and those simple words, "You're safe now," spoken with such quiet certainty that even her dreaming mind believed them. She woke with a start as dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was sleeping outside. Then, it all came flooding back: the stagecoach, the attack, the cowboy who'd come to their rescue. Wyatt was already up, coffee brewing in a battered pot nestled among the coals. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all, but his movements were still precise and energetic as he checked on their fellow travelers. "Morning," he said when he noticed her watching him. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, pushing herself up to sitting. Her body ached from the unfamiliar sleeping arrangement and the previous night's ordeal. He handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "It's strong," he warned. The first sip confirmed his assessment: strong enough to stand a spoon in, as her father would have said. The thought brought a pang of grief, but also a strange comfort. Her parents had raised her to be resilient, resourceful. What would they think of her now, bedraggled and wearing a stranger's jacket in the wilds of Colorado territory? They'd be proud she'd survived, she decided. That was the first step. "What happens now?" she asked Wyatt as he settled beside her on the log. "I'll ride into Sweetwater Creek as soon as everyone's up, bring back help and a wagon." He studied her over the rim of his own coffee cup. "Town's only about 5 miles from here. Sheriff Burke will want to know about those bandits. You think he'll be able to catch them?" Wyatt considered this. "Depends. If they're local troublemakers, maybe. If they're passing through." He shrugged. "Territory's big. Easy for men to disappear if they've a mind to." The thought of those men remaining free to terrorize other travelers was unsettling, but Harriet pushed it aside. There were more immediate concerns. "My trunk," she remembered suddenly. "All my belongings were on that stagecoach. We'll retrieve everything once we get help," he assured her. "Don't think those bandits had time to take much before I interrupted them." She nodded, grateful for his calm practicality. It was then she noticed his eyes had drifted to where his jacket had slipped slightly, revealing her torn dress beneath. Harriet clutched the jacket closed again, cheeks warming. "Sorry," he said immediately, looking away. "I was just thinking. My sister runs the mercantile in town. She could help you with." He gestured vaguely. "A replacement dress," Harriet supplied, saving him from his evident discomfort. "Yes, madam. That would be very kind." She hesitated, then added, "I hope I'll be able to repay all this kindness once I receive my first wages." Something like surprise flickered across Wyatt's face. No need for that, just doing what anyone would. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have ridden toward the sound of gunfire in the dead of night, risked their life for strangers, or given up their jacket and night's rest without complaint. By the time the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows through the pines, everyone was awake. The stagecoach driver's head was clearer, though he sported an impressive bruise. The guard's arm was stiff, but the bleeding had stopped. The Hendersons moved slowly, but seemed in good spirits considering the circumstances. Wyatt shared out a breakfast of jerky, hardtack, and more of the punishingly strong coffee before preparing to ride to town. "Will you be all right here without me?" he asked Harriet as he saddled his horse. The question surprised her. She wasn't the only one staying behind, after all. But something in his expression suggested a particular concern for her well-being. "We'll manage," she assured him. "The sooner you go, the sooner we'll all be safely in town." He nodded, then hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat and swung into the saddle. Harriet watched him ride away, the morning sun glinting off his dark hair beneath his hat. Only when he disappeared among the trees did she realize she was still wearing his jacket and he hadn't asked for it back. The next few hours passed slowly. Harriet helped the others as best she could, cleaning the guard's wound with water from Wyatt's canteen, gathering more firewood, and listening to Mrs. Henderson's stories about Sweetwater Creek and its inhabitants. She learned that the town had grown considerably in the past 5 years, boasting not just the basics of a mercantile and saloon but a proper hotel, a doctor's office, and now, soon, a schoolhouse. "The children have been using the back room of the church," Mrs. Henderson explained, "but with so many families settling now, they need something larger." "And you say Mr. Jackson's sister runs the mercantile?" Harriet asked, curious about the man who'd saved them. "Martha Jackson. Oh yes, finest store between Denver and Santa Fe, if you ask me. That family's been a blessing to Sweetwater Creek." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "And speaking of blessings, that brother of hers is quite the catch. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he doesn't seem to notice." Harold Henderson chuckled from where he sat mending a tear in his coat. "Woman, are you matchmaking again?" "Simply stating facts," his wife replied primly, but winked at Harriet. Harriet felt her cheeks grow warm. "I'm sure Mr. Jackson has been kind to everyone he's rescued from stagecoach robberies," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "Rescued many, has he?" The stagecoach driver chimed in with a grin, his first show of humor since the attack. "Oh, hush, all of you," Harriet said, unable to keep from smiling despite her embarrassment. "The man did his Christian duty, nothing more." But even as she said it, she found herself remembering the gentle way Wyatt had placed his jacket around her shoulders, the concern in his eyes when he'd asked if she was all right. Such small gestures, yet they had made her feel valued, protected not as a fragile thing to be sheltered, but as a person worth safeguarding. It was nearly midday when they heard the approach of wagons and horses. Harriet stood, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt a disproportionate surge of relief when she recognized Wyatt riding at the head of the small procession. Behind him came a wagon driven by a sturdily built man with a star pinned to his vest, Sheriff Burke, presumably, and a second wagon with a woman at the reins who bore such a striking resemblance to Wyatt that she could only be his sister, Martha. "Found them all safe and sound," Wyatt called to the sheriff as they entered the clearing. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Sheriff Burke took statements from everyone about the robbery, his weathered face growing increasingly grim. Martha Jackson immediately took charge of Harriet, bringing a bundle of clothing from her wagon. "My brother said your dress was damaged," she said by way of greeting, her directness matched by kind eyes. "I've brought a few things that might fit you. You can change in our wagon." Harriet was overwhelmed by the generosity. "I can't accept. Nonsense," Martha cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Consider it a loan until your trunk is recovered." "Besides," she added with a smile that transformed her practical face, "Wyatt would never forgive me if I didn't look after you properly." There was something in the way she said it that made Harriet wonder exactly what Wyatt had told his sister about the previous night's events. The dress Martha offered was a simple calico in a soft shade of green, not unlike what Harriet might have chosen herself. It fit well enough with only minor adjustments needed at the waist, and the accompanying shawl was a welcome addition. When Harriet emerged from the wagon, feeling human again with her hair neatly pinned and wearing clean, untorn clothing, she found Wyatt watching her from where he stood conversing with the sheriff. Something in his expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps made her heart beat a little faster. "Thank you for the dress," she said when she approached them. "Your sister is very kind." "Martha has a good heart," Wyatt agreed, "though she'll deny it if accused of being soft." Sheriff Burke excused himself to check on the progress of loading their few belongings into the wagons, leaving Harriet and Wyatt momentarily alone. "Here's your jacket," Harriet said, holding out the garment she'd carefully folded. "I don't know how to thank you properly for everything you've done." Wyatt took the jacket, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "No thanks necessary, Miss Jenkins." "Harriet," she corrected him. "Please." A smile touched his lips. "Harriet, then." The way he said her name with a slight drawl that stretched the syllables sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Mr. Jackson, Wyatt," he countered, the smile reaching his eyes now. "Wyatt," she conceded. "I hope I'll see you in town. Perhaps I could buy you a meal at the hotel as a small token of my gratitude." For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised by the offer. Then something like pleasure replaced the surprise. "I'd like that," he said simply, all set to head back to civilization. Sheriff Burke called, interrupting the moment. Wyatt offered his hand to help Harriet into Martha's wagon. "Welcome to Sweetwater Creek," he said as she settled onto the wooden seat. "It's not what you're used to back east, I expect, but it has its charms." Looking at him standing there, tall and steady in the Colorado sunshine, Harriet thought those charms might be more compelling than he realized. The journey to Sweetwater Creek took less than an hour along a rutted trail that eventually widened into something approaching a proper road. Martha proved to be excellent company, forthright, intelligent, and possessed of a dry humor that frequently made Harriet laugh despite her lingering fatigue. "So you're our new schoolteacher," Martha said as they crested a rise that offered the first view of the town spread out in the valley below. "The children will be thrilled. They've been making poor Pastor Williams quite gray with their energy." "I hope I can live up to expectations," Harriet replied, feeling a flutter of nervousness at the sight of her new home. Sweetwater Creek was larger than she had imagined, no mere cluster of buildings, but a proper town with several streets radiating from a central square. She could make out the white steeple of a church, the larger structure of what must be the hotel, and numerous other buildings of varying sizes. "You'll do fine," Martha assured her. "Anyone who stands up to armed bandits can handle a classroom of children." At Harriet's surprised look, she added, "Wyatt told me what happened, said you showed real backbone." The praise warmed Harriet, especially coming secondhand from Wyatt. She'd acted on instinct, not courage, but perhaps out here they amounted to the same thing. As they entered town, people emerged from businesses to watch their procession, word of the stagecoach robbery clearly having spread. Harriet felt suddenly self-conscious in her borrowed dress, aware of the curious stares. "Don't mind them," Martha said, noting her discomfort. "News travels fast in small towns, and excitement is rare enough to draw a crowd." They stopped first at the sheriff's office to complete the formal report of the robbery. While the others were giving their statements, Martha took Harriet to the hotel where a room had been prepared for her. The Sweetwater Creek Hotel was surprisingly elegant for a frontier town, not grand by Eastern standards, perhaps, but clean, well-maintained, and tastefully furnished. The lobby featured polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and comfortable seating areas. "Mrs. Rivera runs the place," Martha explained as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. "Her late husband built it 5 years ago. Best accommodations between here and Denver." Harriet's room was small but charming, with a brass bed, washstand, dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. After days of travel and a night sleeping on the ground, it looked like paradise. "The school board arranged for you to stay here until the teacherage is completed," Martha explained, setting down the small bundle of additional clothing she'd brought. "Should be another week or 2. "This is lovely," Harriet said, running a hand over the crisp white counterpane. "I hadn't expected such comfort." "We're not complete savages out here," Martha replied with a wink. "Now you rest. I'll send someone up with hot water, and there's a dining room downstairs when you're hungry." Left alone, Harriet sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. She'd been robbed, terrified, rescued, and had arrived at her destination all in the span of a day. And somewhere in the midst of it all, she'd met a man who had shown her what true strength looked like, not in his ability to face down bandits, though that was impressive, but in the gentle way he'd placed his jacket around her shoulders and promised her safety. "You're being silly," she told herself firmly. The man was simply being kind. But as she unpinned her hair and prepared to wash away the last traces of her ordeal, Harriet couldn't help wondering if she'd see Wyatt Jackson again before long. She didn't have to wonder for very long. After refreshing herself with a proper wash and a short nap that turned into several hours of deep sleep, Harriet made her way downstairs to the hotel's dining room, feeling almost human again in Martha's borrowed dress. The dining room was half full, conversations buzzing around tables covered with checkered cloths. A waitress approached as Harriet hesitated in the doorway. "You must be Miss Jenkins," the young woman said with a friendly smile. "I'm Louisa Rivera. My mother owns the hotel." "Pleased to meet you," Harriet replied, immediately liking the girl's open manner. "We've saved a table for you," Louisa continued, leading the way to a small table near the window. "And Mr. Jackson asked if he might join you if that's agreeable." Harriet's pulse quickened. "Mr. Jackson is here. Just came in," Louisa confirmed, gesturing toward the entrance where Wyatt stood, hat in hand, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his familiar jacket. He looked different in the warm lamplight of the dining room, less the rugged rescuer and more a respectable townsman, though no less handsome for the transformation. When he caught sight of her, his face brightened with a smile that Harriet couldn't help returning. "I hope I'm not imposing," he said as he approached. "I remembered your offer of a meal and thought perhaps—" "Not imposing at all," Harriet assured him, pleased that he'd remembered. "Though I believe I was the one who was to buy you dinner as thanks." "We'll argue about that later," he said, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. Once they were both seated, a moment of awkwardness descended. In the clear light of the dining room, away from the danger and drama of their first meeting, Harriet was suddenly very aware that she was dining alone with a man she barely knew, a breach of propriety that would have scandalized her Pennsylvania neighbors. But they weren't in Pennsylvania anymore. "How are you feeling?" Wyatt asked, breaking the silence. "After everything that happened." "Better, thank you." She smoothed her napkin across her lap. "Your sister has been incredibly kind." "Martha has a soft spot for strays," he said with a fond smile. "Took me in when I came back from the war with nowhere else to go." This glimpse into his past intrigued Harriet. "You fought in the war," he nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Union cavalry. Came west afterward like a lot of men who couldn't quite settle back into normal life." "And your sister was already here." Martha and her husband moved out in '65, right after the war ended. He passed 2 years later mountain fever, but she stayed on, built that mercantile into the best store in the county. Pride colored his voice. "She's quite a woman." "That seems to run in your family," Harriet said, then blushed at her own boldness. Wyatt's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I think that's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." Their conversation flowed more easily after that. Over a dinner of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that rivaled anything Harriet had tasted back east, they exchanged stories of their lives before Sweetwater Creek. Wyatt, she learned, had grown up on a small farm in Kentucky, joined the Union Army at 19, despite his border state's divided loyalties, and had worked as everything from a cattle driver to a silver mine guard before settling in Colorado territory. In turn, Harriet told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's position as a country doctor, and her mother's insistence that Harriet receive an education equal to any man's. Both her parents had died within months of each other, her father from a heart condition, her mother from pneumonia contracted while nursing him. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said when she spoke of their passing. "Losing family leaves a hole nothing quite fills." There was such understanding in his voice that Harriet wondered what losses he had suffered beyond those he'd mentioned. "Is it just you and Martha now?" she asked gently. He nodded, gaze dropping to his coffee cup. "Our parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both. Had a brother 2 younger, lost him at Shiloh." The simple statement held worlds of grief, and Harriet's heart ached for him. Without thinking, she reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching the back of his hand. "I'm sorry." Wyatt looked surprised by the contact but didn't pull away. For a moment, they sat in shared understanding of loss, a connection deeper than their brief acquaintance should allow. Then the waitress appeared with more coffee, and the moment broke, Harriet withdrawing her hand as Wyatt straightened in his chair. "The sheriff filled me in on what they found at the stagecoach site," he said, shifting to safer ground. "Your trunk is safe, just some water damage to a few books. He'll have it delivered here tomorrow." "That's wonderful news," Harriet said, relieved. "I was afraid I'd lost everything." He also said they found tracks heading south. Thinks those bandits might be part of the Carson gang that's been causing trouble along the stage routes. "Will they catch them, do you think?" Wyatt's expression turned grim. "Eventually. Men like that get careless, especially if they think they've gotten away with something." The reminder of how close she'd come to real danger sent a shiver through Harriet. Reading her reaction, Wyatt's face softened. "You're safe here," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "Sweetwater Creek looks after its own. Even newcomers who haven't taught their first class yet?" she asked with a tentative smile. "Especially them," he confirmed, returning her smile with one that warmed his entire face. By the time they finished their meal, the dining room had nearly emptied. Harriet was reluctant for the evening to end, finding comfort in Wyatt's steady presence and engaging conversation. But the day's events had taken their toll, and she couldn't suppress a yawn. "I've kept you too long," Wyatt said immediately, signaling for the check. "Not at all," she protested. "This has been lovely." When the bill came, they did indeed argue over who would pay, Wyatt eventually winning by pointing out that she hadn't even received her first month's wages yet. "You can buy me dinner after your first payday," he suggested as they stood to leave. The casual implication that they would continue to see each other pleased Harriet more than she cared to admit. "It's a deal," she agreed. He walked her to the staircase leading up to the rooms, hesitating at the bottom step. "I wondered if you might like a tour of the town tomorrow," he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that was endearing from a man who had faced down armed bandits without flinching. "If you're feeling up to it." "I'd like that very much," Harriet replied, perhaps too quickly, but she couldn't bring herself to feign indifference. "What time shall we meet?" 10 o'clock. "In the lobby, perfect." An awkward moment followed, neither quite knowing how to say goodnight. Back home, there would have been clear protocols, chaperones, formal handshakes observed by watchful eyes. "Thank you again, Wyatt," Harriet said finally. "For everything." He tipped his hat, a gesture she was beginning to find charming. "Sleep well, Harriet." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Harriet was aware of his gaze following her, and equally aware of the impropriety of the warm feelings unfurling in her chest for a man she'd known barely a day. But as she prepared for bed in the quiet of her room, she couldn't bring herself to regret a moment of their time together. Tomorrow, she thought as she drifted towards sleep, she would see Sweetwater Creek through Wyatt Jackson's eyes and perhaps begin to see a future for herself in this wild, beautiful place that had already given her more adventure than all her previous years combined. The morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through Harriet's window and painting golden patterns across her quilt. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The unfamiliar room, the distant sounds of a town waking rather than the quiet of her Pennsylvania home. Then memory returned, bringing with it anticipation for the day ahead. She dressed carefully in another of the borrowed dresses. Martha had provided this one a pretty blue calico with white piping, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. With no mirror larger than a hand glass, she could only hope she looked presentable. When she descended to the lobby at 5 minutes before 10, Wyatt was already waiting, hat in hand, looking as though he'd been there a while. The way his face brightened when he saw her sent a flutter through Harriet's chest that had nothing to do with the stairs she'd just descended. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I hope you slept well, like a rock," she admitted. "I think yesterday caught up with me all at once." "Understandable." His eyes took in her appearance with obvious appreciation, though he was too much of a gentleman to comment directly. "Ready to see your new home." Home. The word resonated with Harriet in unexpected ways. She'd come to Sweetwater Creek out of necessity rather than choice, seeking employment after her parents' deaths had left her with limited options. Yet already, just one day in, the town was beginning to feel like it could indeed become home. "Lead the way," she said with a smile. The morning air was crisp and clear, the sky that particular shade of Colorado blue that seemed to go on forever. Sweetwater Creek was bustling with activity, wagons rumbling down the main street, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, children darting between buildings on mysterious errands of their own. "Main Street," Wyatt said unnecessarily as they stepped onto the boardwalk. "Most everything you need is right here." He pointed out each business as they walked: the barber shop, the bank, the blacksmith, the newspaper office. Everyone they passed greeted Wyatt by name, many stopping to be introduced to the new schoolteacher with undisguised curiosity. "Word travels fast," Harriet murmured after the fifth such introduction. "Small town," Wyatt replied with a shrug. "Besides, we haven't had a new schoolteacher in 3 years and never one so—" He stopped abruptly. "Never one so what?" she prompted, intrigued by his sudden reticence. A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "Never one so young and pretty," he admitted. "The last teacher was Mrs. Winters, formidable woman, taught half the town to read, including me when I first arrived." It was Harriet's turn to blush at the casual compliment. "Well, I hope I can live up to Mrs. Winters' legacy, if not her formidability." "You'll do fine," he assured her, his confidence warming her. They continued their tour, Wyatt showing her the doctor's office. Doc Miller's getting on in years, but still the best physician in the territory. The church where school was currently held. Pastor Williams will be mighty glad to reclaim his back room. And finally, the half-constructed schoolhouse itself. The building stood at the edge of town, a sturdy wooden structure with large windows to let in plenty of light. The exterior was nearly complete, but Harriet could see through the open doorway that the interior was still very much a work in progress. "Should be finished in a couple of weeks," Wyatt said as they approached. "The town pitched in to build it once they knew we'd secured a teacher." "It's perfect," Harriet breathed, already imagining the space filled with desks, books, and eager young minds. A man emerged from inside the building, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older than Wyatt, perhaps in his 50s, with iron gray hair and the muscled build of someone who'd spent a lifetime in physical labor. "Thought I heard voices," he said, breaking into a smile when he saw who it was. "Wyatt. And this must be our new teacher. Miss Harriet Jenkins, meet Tom Perkins," Wyatt introduced them. "Best carpenter in Colorado Territory and chairman of our school board." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Jenkins," Tom said, extending a calloused hand. "We've been looking forward to your arrival. Though I hear you had some trouble on the way." "Nothing Mr. Jackson couldn't handle," Harriet replied, shaking his hand. Tom's eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. "That's so. Well, our Wyatt always did have a knack for being in the right place at the right time." Something in his tone suggested he was referring to more than just Wyatt's timely rescue, and Harriet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Would you like to see inside?" Tom offered, gesturing toward the schoolhouse door. "It's not fancy, but it'll serve." The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with high ceilings and space for at least 20 students. Sawdust covered the floor, and the smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the air. One wall was partially lined with bookshelves, and a larger desk stood at the front of the room. "That's for you," Tom said, following her gaze to the desk. "Martha donated it from the mercantile's back office." "It's wonderful," Harriet said, genuinely moved by the community's efforts. "All of it." "Wait until you see the teacherage," Wyatt said. "It's around back." Connected to the main schoolhouse by a covered walkway was a smaller structure, just 2 rooms, but well built and thoughtfully designed. The larger room would serve as a combined sitting room and kitchen, with a small stove for cooking and heating. The smaller was a bedroom, currently unfurnished but with a window that caught the morning light beautifully. "It's not what you're used to back east, I expect," Tom said, echoing Wyatt's words from the day before. "It's perfect," Harriet assured him, and surprisingly she meant it. The small house was indeed a far cry from the comfortable home she'd grown up in, but there was something appealing about its simplicity, its purpose. "We'll have it finished and furnished before the first day of school," Tom promised. "The ladies' auxiliary is sewing curtains, and Martha's set aside furniture from the mercantile." After thanking Tom and promising to return soon to discuss curriculum with the school board, Harriet and Wyatt continued their tour. They visited Martha's mercantile, a treasure trove of goods that rivaled many stores Harriet had seen in larger eastern cities. Martha herself was busy with customers, but waved cheerfully from behind the counter. "I need to repay your sister for these clothes," Harriet said as they left the store. "And you for dinner last night." "Martha won't accept payment for the clothes," Wyatt said with certainty. "Consider them a welcome gift. As for dinner—" He glanced at the position of the sun overhead. "It's nearly noon. How about you let me show you the best view in Sweetwater Creek, and we can call it even." The best view turned out to be a small hill just beyond the town limits, accessible by a winding path that climbed gently through stands of pine and aspen. Wyatt had stopped at the hotel kitchen to request a picnic basket, which he now carried as they made their way up the trail. "Is this still part of the official tour?" Harriet teased, grateful for the sturdy boots Martha had included among the borrowed clothing. "Absolutely essential," Wyatt confirmed with mock seriousness. "No proper introduction to Sweetwater Creek is complete without seeing it from Lookout Hill." The trail opened onto a grassy clearing at the hill's summit, and Harriet caught her breath at the panorama spread before them. The town lay in the valley below, nestled between rolling hills and the distant, snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. The creek that gave the town its name wound like a silver ribbon through the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Worth the climb?" Wyatt asked, watching her face rather than the view. "Definitely." He spread a blanket from the picnic basket on a patch of grass, and they settled down to a simple meal of cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. The informal setting should have felt improper to Harriet's Eastern sensibilities, but there was something about the open sky and Wyatt's easy company that made convention seem less important. "What made you decide to come all the way out here to teach?" Wyatt asked as they ate. Surely there were positions closer to home. Harriet considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer. "After my parents died, the house had to be sold to settle some debts. I could have found a teaching position in a nearby town, stayed with family friends, perhaps eventually married someone my parents would have approved of." She looked out at the vast landscape. "But it all felt predetermined. I wanted to write my own story." Wyatt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The war taught a lot of us that life is too short to live by other people's expectations." "Exactly," she said, pleased that he grasped her meaning so readily. "When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Colorado Territory, it felt like an opportunity to start fresh, to be defined by my own choices rather than circumstances or tradition. And now that you're here, having faced down bandits and survived a night in the wilderness." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "Any regrets?" Harriet thought about the terror of the stagecoach robbery, the uncertainty of arriving in a strange town, the challenges that still lay ahead. Then she looked at the man beside her, steady, kind, unexpectedly thoughtful, and the town below that had already shown her more welcome than she dared to hope for. "Not a single one," she said with conviction. Wyatt's smile in response was like the sun breaking through clouds. They lingered on the hilltop, conversation flowing easily between them. Wyatt told her about his work. He owned a small ranch outside town and broke horses for neighboring spreads, served as a part-time deputy when the sheriff needed extra hands, and helped with the building of the schoolhouse. Harriet shared her ideas for the school curriculum, her love of literature, and her hopes for her new life in Sweetwater Creek. It was only when the sun began to dip toward the western mountains that they reluctantly packed up the remains of their picnic. "Thank you for today," Harriet said as they started back down the trail. "I feel much better prepared to start my new position now that I've seen the town." "My pleasure," Wyatt replied. Then, with a hint of hesitation, "I hope we can do this again." "I'd like that," she said simply. They were halfway down the trail when hoofbeats sounded behind them. Wyatt tensed, stepping slightly in front of Harriet before relaxing as he recognized the rider. "Wyatt, Miss Jenkins," Sheriff Burke called, reining in his horse beside them. His expression was serious. "Glad I found you. There's news about those bandits." "What kind of news?" Wyatt asked, his body still angled protectively toward Harriet. "We captured 2 of them," Burke said. "Caught them trying to rob a freight wagon south of here, but the leader got away." "You need me to ride with a posse?" Wyatt asked immediately. The sheriff shook his head. "Already sent men after him, but that's not why I'm here." His gaze shifted to Harriet. "The men we captured had plenty to say once they realized they were looking at serious prison time. Turns out the stagecoach robbery wasn't random. They were after something specific." "The strong box," Harriet guessed, remembering the bandits' demands. "No, madam, they were looking for a passenger." Burke's expression grew grim. "A schoolteacher heading to Sweetwater Creek." Shock rippled through Harriet. "Me? But why?" "I don't have anything of value." "It wasn't about robbery," Burke said quietly. "The leader had other intentions. Seems he saw your name on the passenger manifest in Denver and recognized it. Said something about settling an old score with your father." Harriet's mind raced. Her father, as a country doctor, had occasionally testified in court cases, some involving dangerous men. But that had been back east years ago. "Did they say who he was?" "This leader?" Wyatt asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Calls himself Rafe Carson now, but his real name is Ralph Connolly, mean customer, escaped from a Pennsylvania prison 3 years back." The sheriff turned to Harriet. "Name mean anything to you, miss?" The blood drained from Harriet's face. "Yes," she whispered. "My father testified against him. He killed a man in a dispute over land. Father's testimony helped convict him." Wyatt's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "And now he's after Harriet. For revenge," Burke nodded grimly. "Those were his words, according to his men. Said he'd make the doctor's daughter pay." He looked apologetically at Harriet. "I'm sorry to frighten you, Miss Jenkins, but you needed to know. We've got men looking for him, and I'll assign a deputy to keep an eye on you until he's caught." "Thank you, Sheriff," Harriet managed, her mind still reeling from the revelation. "I'll look after her too," Wyatt said with a firmness that brooked no argument. Burke nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Figured as much. I'll keep you posted on the search." With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse back toward town. When they were alone again, Harriet realized she was trembling. The beautiful day had suddenly darkened with shadows from her past. "Hey," Wyatt said gently, turning to face her fully. "We'll catch him. Until then, you'll be safe in town. What if he comes after me again?" Harriet asked, hating the fear in her voice but unable to suppress it. "What if he hurts someone else trying to get to me?" "That's not going to happen," Wyatt said with such conviction that Harriet almost believed him. "This town protects its own, remember, and like it or not, you're one of us now." One of us. Despite the circumstances, the words warmed something inside her that had been cold since her parents' deaths. Wyatt offered his arm. "Let's get you back to the hotel. I think we could both use some coffee after that news." As they walked the rest of the way down the hill, Harriet was acutely conscious of Wyatt's solid presence beside her, of the protective way he scanned their surroundings, of the quiet strength he offered without overwhelming her. She had come west seeking independence, a chance to write her own story. Now it seemed that story would include more danger than she had anticipated, but also, perhaps, more support than she had dared to hope for. And walking beside her was a man who had already saved her once, who was promising, in his steady, unassuming way, to do so again if necessary. The knowledge should have terrified her, this threat from the past, this unexpected intimacy with a man she barely knew. Instead, Harriet found herself drawing strength from both. If danger was coming, better to face it here, in this place that already felt more like home than anywhere since her parents' house, with people who seemed determined to stand beside her. Better to face it with Wyatt Jackson at her side. In the days that followed, Sweetwater Creek rallied around its newest resident with a protectiveness that both touched and occasionally frustrated Harriet. Sheriff Burke assigned a deputy named Jim Foster to keep watch near the hotel, and Wyatt seemed to appear whenever Harriet ventured outside, as if by some uncanny instinct. "I'm not complaining about the company," she told him on the third day as they walked from the hotel to the nearly completed schoolhouse. "But don't you have a ranch to run?" "Got good hands," he replied with a shrug. "They can manage without me for a spell. And the horses you're supposed to be breaking. They'll still need breaking when Carson is caught." His tone made it clear the subject wasn't open for debate, despite her occasional protests about being treated like fragile china. Harriet was secretly grateful for Wyatt's constant presence. In the span of less than a week, he had become not just her protector but her friend, someone who listened to her ideas about education with genuine interest, who made her laugh with stories of frontier mishaps, who seemed to understand her need for both security and independence. Martha Jackson, too, had taken Harriet under her wing, inviting her to stay at the rooms above the Mercantile rather than remaining alone at the hotel. "More practical," she insisted, "and I could use the company." Harriet accepted the offer gratefully. Martha's no-nonsense manner and practical wisdom reminded her of her own mother, and the Mercantile owner's friendship helped fill some of the loneliness Harriet had carried since her parents' deaths. Life developed a rhythm despite the shadow of Ralph Connolly's threat. Mornings were spent at the schoolhouse, working with Tom Perkins and the other builders to prepare for classes. Afternoons often found Harriet at Martha's Mercantile, cataloging books donated for the school library or sewing curtains for her new home. Evenings usually included dinner with Wyatt, sometimes at the hotel, sometimes at Martha's table above the store. And through it all, the search for Connolly continued, though the man himself seemed to have vanished into the vastness of the territory. "He's likely lying low," Sheriff Burke explained when Wyatt pressed him for updates. "Knows we're looking for him, but men like that can't stay hidden forever. They always make a mistake." A week after Harriet's arrival in Sweetwater Creek, the schoolhouse was declared complete. A small celebration was planned, nothing elaborate, Martha assured her. Just a chance for the town to welcome its new teacher properly. "You can't hide away forever because of that outlaw," Martha said firmly when Harriet expressed concern about creating a public event. "Besides, half the men in town will be armed, including my brother." The gathering was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, to be followed by a dance in the new building, its first official use, before classes began on Monday. Despite her lingering anxiety about Connolly, Harriet found herself looking forward to the event, to meeting her future students and their families in a festive setting. On Saturday morning, Martha presented her with a package wrapped in brown paper. "A little welcome gift," she explained. "Can't have our teacher looking like she borrowed her clothes for the big day." Inside was a dress of deep blue cotton, simply cut but beautifully made, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "Martha," Harriet breathed, running her fingers over the fine stitching. "It's beautiful." The older woman waved away her thanks. "Town pitched in. The fabrics from my store, but the sewing circle did the work. Every teacher needs one good dress." Tears pricked Harriet's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. Please thank everyone for me." "You can thank them yourself this afternoon," Martha said, but her voice was gentler than usual, perhaps understanding how much the gesture meant to someone who had lost so much. Wyatt arrived to escort them to the celebration just after noon, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean white shirt and his best jacket. He stopped short when he saw Harriet in her new dress, the blue bringing out the color of her eyes. "You look—" he began, then seemed to lose the thread of his thought. "The word you're looking for is lovely," Martha supplied, eyes twinkling as she grabbed her shawl. "Now let's go before we're late to our own party." The schoolhouse had been transformed. Fresh pine boughs decorated the newly installed bookshelves, ribbons festooned the windows, and tables laden with food lined one wall. What seemed like the entire population of Sweetwater Creek and surrounding farms had turned out, filling the room with cheerful conversation. A hush fell as Harriet entered on Wyatt's arm, then broke into warm applause. Tom Perkins stepped forward, beaming proudly. "Miss Jenkins," he announced, "welcome to your school." The next hours passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and expressions of welcome. Harriet met so many people she knew, she would never remember all their names: farmers and shopkeepers, miners and cowboys, and children of all ages, who regarded their new teacher with emotions ranging from shy curiosity to undisguised excitement. Through it all, Wyatt remained close by, a steady presence that anchored her amid the whirl of new faces. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the room, and his smile would send a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the crowded schoolhouse. As afternoon melted into evening, someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and the celebration transitioned smoothly into a dance. Tables were pushed back, and Perkins officially opened the floor with a bow to Martha, who accepted with mock formality that made everyone laugh. Harriet watched from the side, clapping in time with the lively tune when Wyatt appeared beside her. "May I have this dance, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, extending his hand. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced at frontier dances," she replied, but placed her hand in his. "Just follow my lead," he said, drawing her onto the floor. "It's not so different from Eastern dances, just a bit more enthusiastic." He was right, the patterns were familiar enough, though executed with more energy and less rigid formality than the dances of her youth. Wyatt was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her through the steps with the same quiet competence he showed in everything. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked as he spun her through a turn. "Martha insisted," he replied with a grin. said no brother of hers was going to stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt. The image made Harriet laugh, the sound rising clear and bright above the music. It felt good to laugh, to move, to be part of something joyful after days of looking over her shoulder. As the evening progressed, Harriet danced with several partners: Tom Perkins, Sheriff Burke, various fathers of her future students, but always found her way back to Wyatt when the music changed. By unspoken agreement, they claimed the last dance, a slower waltz that allowed for conversation. "Enjoying your welcome party?" Wyatt asked as they moved together around the floor, his hand warm at her waist. "More than I can say," Harriet replied honestly. "Everyone has been so kind. They like you," he said simply. Hard not to, the compliment delivered without artifice warmed her. "I like them too, and Sweetwater Creek. It already feels more like home than I expected." Something flickered in Wyatt's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or something deeper. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I want you to be happy here." The music was drawing to a close, couples slowing around them. In that moment, with Wyatt looking at her as if she were something precious, Harriet felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever happened with Connolly, whatever challenges lay ahead, she had found where she belonged. The final notes faded, and a smattering of applause broke out for the musicians. Wyatt's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, the proper distance between them restored. "I should help with the cleanup," Harriet said, reluctant to break the spell of the evening but aware of her responsibilities. "I'll walk you back to Martha's afterward," Wyatt replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request but a statement of fact. The cleanup went quickly with many hands helping, and soon the schoolhouse was returned to order, ready for its true purpose on Monday morning. The night had grown cool, stars pricking the velvet darkness above as the last of the partygoers dispersed. Martha, citing fatigue, accepted a ride home in Tom Perkins' wagon, leaving Wyatt and Harriet to walk back to the Mercantile alone. The streets of Sweetwater Creek were quiet, most businesses closed for the night, though light and piano music spilled from the saloon at the far end of Main Street. "Thank you for the dances," Harriet said as they walked, her arm tucked through Wyatt's. "I haven't enjoyed an evening so much in a long time." "Nor have I," he admitted. "Though I still owe you a proper tour of my ranch, perhaps tomorrow if you're not too busy preparing for school." "I'd like that," she agreed, pleased by the prospect of seeing where he lived, of knowing that part of his life. They had almost reached the Mercantile when Wyatt suddenly stiffened, his step faltering. Before Harriet could ask what was wrong, he pulled her into the shadowed doorway of the closed barber shop, his body positioned between her and the street. "What?" she began, but he pressed a finger to his lips, his other hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "Thought I saw someone watching us from the alley across the street," he murmured, eyes scanning the darkness. Fear, almost forgotten during the evening's festivities, rushed back like a cold wave. "Connolly," she whispered, not sure. Wyatt's voice was tight. "Stay here, don't move." Before she could protest, he had slipped away from the doorway, moving silently toward the alley in question. Harriet pressed herself against the barber shop door, heart hammering in her chest. The blue dress that had felt so pretty earlier now seemed to glow in the darkness, making her an easy target. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, straining to hear any sound beyond the distant piano from the saloon and the blood rushing in her ears. Then a shout, the sound of a scuffle and a gunshot that echoed between the buildings. "Wyatt!" The cry tore from her throat before she could stop it. Ignoring his instruction to stay put, Harriet gathered her skirts and ran toward the sound, fear for him overriding fear for herself. She rounded the corner into the alley just as a second shot rang out. In the dim light from a nearby window, She could make out two figures struggling, Wyatt and a larger man she didn't recognize. Both were on the ground, grappling for control of a gun. Without thinking, Harriet grabbed a discarded bottle from the alley floor and brought it down hard on the stranger's head. The glass shattered and the man went limp. "Wyatt," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside them. "Are you hurt?" He pushed the unconscious man off him and sat up, breathing hard. "I'm all right," he assured her, though he winced as he moved. "What happened to staying where I left you?" "I heard gunshots," she said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Wyatt shook his head, but there was something like admiration in his eyes. "Remind me not to get on your bad side, Miss Jenkins." Before she could respond, running footsteps approached from the street. Sheriff Burke and Deputy Foster appeared at the mouth of the alley, guns drawn. "Heard shots," Burke said tersely. "Everyone all right?" "Fine," Wyatt replied, getting to his feet and pulling Harriet up beside him. "Got our visitor here, though I don't think it's Connolly." The sheriff knelt to examine the unconscious man, rolling him over to reveal a rough-hewn face with a week's growth of beard. "Nope, not him. This is Jed Harper, one of Carson's usual gang. Must have been scouting for his boss." "Is he?" Harriet couldn't finish the question. "Just knocked out," Burke assured her, looking with some surprise at the broken bottle. "You're doing," Harriet nodded, suddenly embarrassed. "I thought he was going to hurt Wyatt." The sheriff's eyebrows rose, and he exchanged a look with Wyatt that Harriet couldn't interpret. "Well, we'll get Mr. Harper settled in a cell. Might be he'll tell us where his boss is planning to strike next." As the sheriff and deputy hauled the unconscious outlaw away, Wyatt turned to Harriet, his expression a mix of concern and something else, something warmer. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "Could have been dangerous. I couldn't just wait there, not knowing if you were hurt." The intensity of her own feelings surprised her. When had this man's safety become so important to her? Wyatt reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, almost reverent. "Thank you," he said simply, "for having my back." In that moment, with adrenaline still coursing through her veins and the night close around them, it would have been easy to lean into his touch, to cross the line from friendship into something more. Harriet felt the pull of it, saw the question in Wyatt's eyes. But not like this, not with fear and danger still hanging over them. "We should get back to Martha's," she said softly. "She'll be worried." Understanding and perhaps a touch of disappointment flickered in his eyes, but he nodded, offering his arm once more. "Let's get you home." They walked the rest of the way in a silence charged with things unsaid, both aware that something had shifted between them tonight in the schoolhouse during that final dance, in the alley with danger binding them together. At the mercantile door, Wyatt paused. "I'll still take you to see the ranch tomorrow if you want, but I'll understand if you'd rather stay in town after what happened." Harriet considered his words, weighing fear against the desire to maintain normalcy, to know more of this man who was becoming increasingly important to her. "I still want to go," she decided. "I won't let Connolly dictate how I live my life." Pride and something deeper shone in Wyatt's eyes. "I'll come for you after church then, and Harriet." He hesitated, then continued more softly, "Be careful tonight. Keep your door locked." "I will," she promised. "You be careful too." She watched him walk away, a solitary figure moving through the pools of lamplight on Main Street before letting herself into the mercantile. Martha was waiting up, relief washing over her face when Harriet appeared. "Heard there was trouble," she said, rising from her chair by the stove. "You all right?" "Yes," Harriet assured her, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, her new dress dusty from kneeling in the alley. "One of Connolly's men was watching the schoolhouse. Wyatt dealt with it." Martha's sharp eyes took in more than Harriet's words conveyed. "My brother has a way of being where he's needed," she said neutrally, "especially when it comes to people he cares about." The simple observation hung in the air between them, an acknowledgment of what was developing between Harriet and Wyatt. "He's a good man," Harriet said finally. "The best," Martha agreed. Then, more briskly, "Now let's get that dress cleaned up before the dirt sets in. Can't have our teacher looking like she's been rolling in alleys on her first day of school." As Harriet prepared for bed later, she found herself thinking about the evening, the joy of the celebration, the terror of the confrontation, and through it all, Wyatt's steady presence. In just over a week, he had become central to her life in Sweetwater Creek, in a way she hadn't anticipated when she'd boarded that stagecoach. Whatever happened with Ralph Connolly, whatever challenges lay ahead with the school, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Her feelings for Wyatt Jackson went beyond gratitude or friendship. And based on the way he had looked at her tonight, she wasn't alone in those feelings. The question was, what would they do about it? Sunday morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect Colorado autumn day. Harriet attended church with Martha, conscious of curious glances and whispered conversations as news of the previous night's excitement spread through the congregation. Wyatt sat across the aisle with Sheriff Burke and Deputy Foster, occasionally catching her eye with a reassuring smile. After the service, Pastor Williams made a point of welcoming Harriet publicly and expressing the town's support in light of the unfortunate situation with Ralph Connolly. While she appreciated the sentiment, Harriet was relieved when Martha rescued her from the well-meaning but sometimes overwhelming attention of her new neighbors. "Ready for your tour?" Wyatt asked, approaching them outside the church. He looked well-rested despite the previous night's confrontation, though Harriet noticed a bruise forming along his jawline where Harper must have struck him. "Looking forward to it," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of spending the afternoon alone with him. Martha gave her brother a knowing look. "Have her back before dark, Wyatt. First day of school tomorrow, remember." "Yes, madam," he replied with mock solemnity, offering Harriet his arm. They rode out of town in a light wagon, following the creek upstream into rolling hills dotted with stands of aspen and pine. The tension of the previous night seemed to dissipate in the bright sunlight and open spaces, allowing conversation to flow easily between them. "How long have you had your ranch?" Harriet asked as they passed farms giving way to larger spreads with grazing cattle. "5 years now," Wyatt replied, handling the reins with casual expertise. "Started small, just 40 acres and a cabin, built it up little by little." "On your own," he nodded. "Martha helped some at first financially, paid her back last year finally." Pride colored his voice. "It's not the biggest spread around, but it's mine, free and clear." The road curved around a hill, and suddenly the Jackson Ranch came into view, a neat log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and beyond, pasture land stretching toward distant ridges. Smoke curled from the chimney and flowers bloomed in boxes beneath the windows, adding unexpected touches of color. "Wyatt, it's beautiful," Harriet said, genuinely impressed by the orderly homestead. He looked pleased by her reaction. "Wait till you see inside." A young man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, waving in greeting. "That's Charlie," Wyatt explained. "Works for me full-time, lives in a cabin out back. Good kid." After introducing Harriet to Charlie and instructing him to unhitch the team, Wyatt led her up to the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, simple but well-crafted furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes that showed regular use, and a kitchen that smelled of something delicious simmering on the stove. "You cook?" Harriet asked, surprised. "Had to learn," he replied with a shrug. Can't expect Charlie to do everything. Besides, I like it. Relaxing after a day's work. Harriet tried to reconcile this domestic side of Wyatt with the man who had tracked outlaws in the dark and disarmed an attacker with his bare hands. The contrast was unexpectedly appealing. He showed her through the house the main room with its river stone fireplace, a small study lined with more books, 2 bedrooms, one clearly his and one set up for guests. Everything was neat, well-maintained, and distinctly masculine in its simplicity. "What do you think?" he asked as they returned to the main room, a hint of vulnerability in his question. "I think it's perfect," Harriet said honestly. "It suits you." "High praise," he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "Now let me show you the horses. That's the real heart of this place." The afternoon unfolded in a leisurely tour of the ranch, the barn where Wyatt kept his prized breeding stock, the corral where he trained horses for neighboring ranches, the creek that provided water year-round, and finally, his favorite spot, a grassy knoll overlooking the entire property, with the mountains providing a majestic backdrop. They spread a blanket there and shared the lunch Martha had packed: cold chicken, biscuits, apple tart, and lemonade in a stone jug. The food was simple but delicious, made better by the company and the view. "So tomorrow you become Sweetwater Creek's official schoolteacher," Wyatt said as they finished eating. "Nervous, a little," Harriet admitted. "It's one thing to teach back east where everything is established, quite another to be the first teacher in a new schoolhouse." "You'll do fine," he assured her. "Those kids are eager to learn. Some haven't had proper schooling before. That's what concerns me. The range of ages and abilities will be challenging." "You'll figure it out," Wyatt said with such confidence that Harriet found herself believing him. "And you won't be alone. The whole town is behind you." The simple statement encompassed so much: the welcome she'd received, Martha's friendship, the community's protective response to Connolly's threat, and most of all, Wyatt's unwavering support. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything since that night by the stagecoach. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "You'd have figured something out," he replied. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Harriet Jenkins." The compliment warmed her. "Still, I'm glad it was you who found us." "So am I." His voice had deepened, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. For a moment they sat in silence, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Wyatt cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell. "We should start back soon," he said, rising to gather the remains of their lunch. "Don't want to incur Martha's wrath by keeping you out too late." The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they neared Sweetwater Creek, Harriet found herself wishing the afternoon didn't have to end, that they could stay in that peaceful moment on the hillside a little longer. The sun was setting as they pulled up in front of the mercantile, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Wyatt helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "I enjoyed today," Harriet said, reluctant to say goodbye. "Your ranch is wonderful." "You're welcome there anytime," he replied, his eyes sincere. "Anytime at all." The invitation hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple words. Harriet knew that by accepting it, even hypothetically, she was acknowledging something growing between them that went beyond friendship. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll remember that." Wyatt stepped closer, his expression earnest. Harriet eyed the mercantile door opened suddenly, spilling lamplight onto the boardwalk. Martha stood framed in the doorway, her expression unusually serious. "There you are," she said. "You'd better come in. Sheriff Burke is waiting." The words sent a chill through Harriet. "What's happened?" Jed Harper talked, Martha replied grimly. Connolly's planning something, soon. Wyatt's hand found Harriet's, squeezing gently. Whatever it is, we'll handle it, he promised, his voice low and certain. Together. Inside the Mercantile, Sheriff Burke was waiting with Deputy Foster, both looking grim. Tom Perkins was there as well, his usually jovial face set in hard lines. Miss Jenkins, the sheriff greeted her. Sorry to intrude on your evening, but we've got news you need to hear. About Connolly? Harriet asked, unconsciously moving closer to Wyatt. Burke nodded. Harper wasn't hard to crack once he woke up. Seems Connolly's been watching the town for days, learning routines, planning. He hesitated, glancing at Wyatt. He knows about the schoolhouse opening tomorrow. Plans to make his move then. Harriet felt the blood drain from her face. The children, she whispered. He won't get near them, Wyatt promised, his voice hard with certainty. We're setting a trap, Burke continued. Let him think everything's proceeding as normal, but we'll have men positioned throughout town. When he shows himself, we take him. Using Miss Jenkins as bait, Wyatt said flatly. It wasn't a question. Not exactly, Burke countered. We'll have her protected every moment. But yes, we need him to make his move so we can end this. There must be another way, Martha protested. If we cancel school, he'll just wait for another opportunity, the sheriff explained. Better to face this on our terms with preparation. A heavy silence fell over the room as they all considered the implications. Finally, Harriet spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. I agree with Sheriff Burke, she said, meeting Wyatt's concerned gaze. I won't live in fear, and I won't deprive these children of their education because of a man from my father's past. If Connolly wants to come after me, let him try with the sheriff and his men ready for him. Wyatt's expression was a complex mix of pride, worry, and something deeper. You're sure about this? I am, she said, straightening her shoulders. My father stood up to Connolly in a courtroom. I can do no less. It's settled then, Burke said with a nod of approval. School proceeds as planned tomorrow, but with some additional security measures. The next hour was spent going over those measures in detail. Deputies would be positioned throughout town, with special attention to the schoolhouse. Parents would be informed to accompany their children to and from school for the time being. Wyatt would remain inside the schoolhouse itself, ostensibly helping with last-minute preparations but actually serving as Harriet's immediate protection. What about the children? Harriet asked, concerned about their safety above all. I don't want them in danger. We'll have men watching the approaches to town, Burke assured her. If Connolly tries to get close, we'll spot him long before he reaches the schoolhouse. As the meeting broke up and the men prepared to leave, Wyatt hung back, waiting until the others had exited before turning to Harriet. I don't like this, he said quietly, using you to draw him out. What's the alternative? She asked. Hide away while he terrorizes the town looking for me, cancel school indefinitely, we could send you somewhere safe until he's caught. And how long would that be? Harriet countered. Weeks, months. No, Wyatt, I came here to teach, to build a life. I won't let Ralph Connolly take that from me. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but promise me you'll be careful, do exactly as Burke and I say tomorrow. I promise, she said solemnly. Then impulsively she reached for his hand. Thank you for caring. Wyatt's fingers tightened around hers. Harriet, I more than care, he began, his voice low and intent. Wyatt, Martha called from the back room. Sheriff wants a word before you go. The moment broke, whatever Wyatt had been about to say remaining unspoken. He squeezed Harriet's hand once more before releasing it. We'll talk tomorrow, he promised. After all this is over. As he left to speak with the sheriff, Harriet found herself wondering what he had been about to say and hoping desperately that they would indeed have a chance to finish that conversation once Connolly was dealt with. Sleep was elusive that night, her mind racing with thoughts of the coming day. But underneath, the fear and uncertainty was a current of determination. She had not come all this way, survived a stagecoach robbery and built connections in her new community, only to be driven away by a ghost from her father's past. And she had not just begun to discover her feelings for Wyatt Jackson, only to leave them unexplored. Whatever tomorrow brought, Harriet was resolved to face it with the courage he believed. She possessed the courage she was beginning to believe in herself. Morning came too soon, pale light filtering through Harriet's window as she dressed for her first day of teaching. She chose the blue dress from the celebration, wanting to reclaim it from the fear that had tainted that evening. Martha had prepared a hearty breakfast, though neither woman had much appetite. They ate in silence, the weight of the day ahead hanging between them. "You don't have to do this," Martha said finally, pushing her plate away. "No one would think less of you for postponing the school opening." "I would think less of myself," Harriet replied simply. Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're good for him, you know." The abrupt change of subject caught Harriet off guard. "For who, my brother?" Martha said, as if it were obvious. "I haven't seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you since before the war." Heat rose to Harriet's cheeks. "We've only known each other a short time." "Some things don't need time," Martha replied with a shrug. "Just recognition." Before Harriet could formulate a response, a knock came at the door. Wyatt stood on the threshold, hat in hand, looking as though he hadn't slept much either. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes taking in the blue dress with a flicker of appreciation despite the tension of the moment. "As I'll ever be," Harriet replied, gathering her teaching materials and the lunch Martha had packed. The walk to the schoolhouse was surreal in its normality. The town was waking up, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, wagons beginning to roll down Main Street. Only the occasional glimpse of a deputy positioned on a rooftop or in an alley doorway betrayed that this was not an ordinary morning. The schoolhouse stood bright and welcoming in the morning light, flags and ribbons still adorning the windows from Saturday's celebration. Inside, everything was ready, desks arranged in neat rows, books stacked on shelves, a polished apple on Harriet's desk, placed there by Martha as a traditional gift for a teacher's first day. "Looks nice," Wyatt commented, moving to check that the back door was secured as they'd planned. "It does," Harriet agreed, running a hand over the smooth surface of her desk. "Hard to believe it's finally happening." "Having second thoughts?" he asked, returning to stand beside her. "About teaching?" "Never." She smiled up at him, drawing strength from his presence. "About using myself as bait for a dangerous outlaw, maybe a few," he chuckled, the sound warming the room. "That's only sensible, but you won't be alone." His hand found hers, squeezing gently. Not for a moment. The simple promise steadied her more than anything else could have. "Thank you." For a moment, they stood close, hands joined, eyes locked in silent communication. Then the sound of approaching voices broke the spell, the first students arriving with their parents. Wyatt released her hand reluctantly. "I'll be right here," he said, moving to a position near the back of the room where he could observe both entrances. "Just focus on your teaching." Easier said than done, Harriet thought as she smoothed her dress and moved to welcome the first arrivals. But as the classroom filled with excited children and their somewhat anxious parents, she found herself drawn into the role she had trained for, her fears receding as she focused on the task at hand. By 9 o'clock, 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age were seated at desks, faces turned expectantly toward their new teacher. Parents had been persuaded to leave, assured by Sheriff Burke's presence outside and Wyatt's inside that their children were well protected. "Good morning," Harriet began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm Miss Jenkins, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher here in Sweetwater Creek." The morning proceeded with surprising normalcy introductions, assessment of reading and arithmetic levels, distribution of the few precious textbooks. The children were well behaved, if curious about Mr. Jackson's presence in the back of the room. Harriet explained that he was helping with the new building, which seemed to satisfy most questions. By noon, when the children were released to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard under Deputy Foster's watchful eye, Harriet was beginning to hope that Connolly had been frightened off by the town's obvious preparations. "You're a natural," Wyatt said, approaching her desk where she was reviewing her notes for the afternoon lessons. "Those kids are already hanging on your every word." "Thank you," she replied, warmed by his praise. "It feels good to be teaching again. Almost makes me forget why you're really here." His expression sobered. "Any sign of trouble outside?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing that I've noticed. Perhaps he's changed his mind, perhaps," Wyatt allowed, though he didn't sound convinced. "Burke has men watching all approaches to town. If Connolly tries anything, they'll spot him." But as the afternoon session began and the hours ticked by without incident, Harriet dared to hope that the danger had indeed passed. The children were attentive and eager to learn. The new schoolhouse was everything she could have wished for, and Wyatt's presence at the back of the room provided a sense of security that allowed her to focus on her teaching. It was only as the final hour approached that a flicker of movement outside the window caught her attention, a shadow passing too quickly to identify. She faltered briefly in her explanation of a geography lesson, eyes darting to Wyatt. He had noticed too, his posture tensing as he moved silently toward the window. "Keep teaching," he mouthed, hand dropping to his holstered revolver. Harriet forced herself to continue, voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. The children, absorbed in copying a map from the blackboard, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. A sharp rap at the door made her jump. Sheriff Burke appeared in the doorway, his expression reassuring despite the alert watchfulness in his eyes. "Just checking in, Miss Jenkins," he said casually. "Everything all right?" "Fine, thank you, Sheriff," she replied, understanding the real question. "We're almost finished for the day." Burke nodded, exchanging a glance with Wyatt that Harriet couldn't interpret before disappearing back outside. The message seemed clear enough, though. Stay alert, but proceed normally. The final half hour of school passed with excruciating slowness. Harriet's awareness divided between her students and the occasional movements visible through the windows, deputies positioning themselves, parents arriving early to collect their children. When the clock finally struck 3, she closed her teaching guide with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "That concludes our first day," she announced, smiling at the class. "You've all done wonderfully. Please gather your things and wait for your parents before leaving." The usual end-of-day chaos ensued, books being stowed, papers gathered, excited chatter filling the room. Wyatt positioned himself near the door, ostensibly helping younger children with their coats, but actually screening everyone who entered to collect their offspring. One by one, the students departed until only 3 remained, the Henderson grandchildren, waiting for their grandfather who was uncharacteristically late. "I can walk them home, Miss Jenkins," offered 16-year-old Thomas Miller, the doctor's son. "It's on my way." Before Harriet could respond, Wyatt interceded smoothly. "I think Miss Jenkins wanted to speak with them about that special project, isn't that right?" His eyes conveyed a clear message. "Keep them here." "Yes, that's right," Harriet improvised. "Why don't you 3 help me organize these books?" while we wait for your grandfather." Thomas departed, and the schoolroom fell quiet except for the chatter of the Henderson children as they cheerfully sorted books by size and color. Wyatt moved to the window, scanning the schoolyard with increased vigilance. "Something's wrong," he murmured to Harriet when she joined him. "Harold Henderson is never late." A cold weight settled in her stomach. "You think Connolly—" "I don't know," he cut her off, not wanting to alarm the children, "but I don't like it." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Sheriff Burke appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Wyatt," he said quietly, "a word." While Wyatt conferred with the sheriff in low tones, Harriet kept the Henderson children occupied, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. "Harriet." Wyatt's voice was steady but urgent as he rejoined her. "We need to get the children to the back room, now." "What's happening?" she asked, already gathering the youngsters. "Connolly has Harold," he replied, voice pitched low for her ears alone. "Send a message you in exchange for the old man." Horror washed through her. "No, we're not going to let that happen," Wyatt assured her, his hand briefly squeezing her arm. "But we need to secure the children first." The small room behind the classroom, intended as a storage space, had no windows and only one door. Wyatt quickly moved shelving to create a barrier, instructed the children to stay absolutely quiet, and promised that everything would be all right. "What's happening, Miss Jenkins?" asked 10-year-old Sarah Henderson, her eyes wide with concern. "Just a precaution," Harriet assured her, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Like a fire drill. You stay here with your brothers until we come get you. Can you be brave for me?" The little girl nodded solemnly, clutching her younger brother's hands. "Deputy Foster will be right outside this door," Wyatt added as the deputy slipped into position. "No one's going to get past him." Back in the main classroom, Harriet found Sheriff Burke and Tom Perkins waiting, faces grim. "He's just outside town," Burke explained. "Has Henderson tied up on a horse. Says he'll kill him unless you come out alone." "I'll go," Harriet said immediately. "I won't have Mr. Henderson harmed because of me." "Not happening," Wyatt cut in, his voice brooking no argument. "We have another plan." The plan, as it turned out, was both simple and desperately risky. Harriet would appear to surrender herself, drawing Connolly close enough for Burke's hidden deputies to get a clear shot. Wyatt would shadow her, staying out of sight until the crucial moment. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked as she prepared to leave the schoolhouse. "What if he shoots Mr. Henderson before your men can act?" "That's why I'll be right behind you," Wyatt replied, checking his revolver. "If it looks like he's going to harm either of you, I'll take him down myself." The quiet confidence in his voice steadied her. This was the same man who had faced down bandits in the darkness, who had promised her safety and delivered it time and again. If anyone could end this nightmare, it was Wyatt Jackson. "All right," she agreed, squaring her shoulders. "Let's finish this." The walk to the edge of town seemed endless, each step bringing her closer to the man who had haunted her since the stagecoach attack. Sheriff Burke accompanied her as far as the last building, then melted away to take his position with the other deputies. And then she was alone, or seemingly so, knowing that Wyatt moved somewhere behind her, keeping to cover. The road stretched before her, and at its end, perhaps 200 yards distant, stood two horses. On one sat Ralph Connolly. She recognized him immediately as the leader of the bandits who had attacked the stagecoach. On the other, slumped and clearly bound, was Harold Henderson. "That's far enough, Miss Jenkins," Connolly called as she approached. "Just wanted to see the doctor's precious daughter one more time." "Let Mr. Henderson go," Harriet replied, her voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "He has nothing to do with this." "Oh, but he does now," Connolly laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humanity. He's my insurance that you'll behave yourself. I'm here as you asked, she said, stopping about 50 feet from the horses. What do you want from me? Connolly's face twisted in a parody of a smile. Justice, Miss Jenkins. Your father took 3 years of my life with his lies in that courtroom. Seems only fair I take something of his in return. My father didn't lie, Harriet replied, anger overriding fear. He testified to what he saw you, shooting an unarmed man in the back over a land dispute. He should have minded his own business, Connolly snarled, his composure cracking. Just like you should have stayed back east where you belonged. Let Henderson go, she insisted. Then you and I can settle whatever you think is between us. For a moment it seemed he might agree, his eyes calculating as he gauged the distance between them. Then his gaze shifted beyond her, narrowing suddenly. Nice try, he growled. But your boyfriend isn't as stealthy as he thinks. Everything happened at once. Connolly yanked Henderson's horse closer, using the old man as a shield. A shot rang out from somewhere to Harriet's right, one of Burke's deputies, forced to take a less than ideal shot as the situation deteriorated. The bullet missed Connolly, but spooked the horses. Henderson's mount reared, throwing the bound man to the ground with a sickening thud. Connolly's horse bolted sideways, momentarily exposing him. Get down! Wyatt's voice behind her, urgent and commanding. Harriet dropped to the dirt road as more shots echoed around her. When she dared to look up, Connolly was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, his gun several feet away. Wyatt was sprinting past her toward the fallen outlaw, his own revolver trained steadily on the man. Don't move, he ordered Connolly, kicking the outlaw's gun even further away. It's over. Sheriff Burke and his deputies converged from all directions, securing Connolly and checking on Henderson, who was dazed but conscious. Harriet ran to the old man's side, helping him to sit up as Tom Perkins arrived with a wagon. Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry, she began, guilt washing through her. Nonsense, child, he wheezed, though pain lined his face from what was likely at least one broken rib. Not your fault some men can't let go of grudges. He patted her hand. The children, are they safe? Perfectly safe, she assured him. Deputy Foster is with them at the school. Relief softened his features. Good, good. My Martha would never forgive me if anything happened to her grandbabies. As Perkins and another man helped Henderson into the wagon to be taken to Doc Miller's office, Harriet turned to find Wyatt watching her, his expression a mix of relief and something deeper, more profound. You all right? He asked, holstering his gun as Burke's deputies hauled a cursing Connolly away. Yes, she replied, suddenly aware of how filthy her blue dress had become when she hit the dirt. Thanks to you. Again. He shook his head, closing the distance between them. You handled yourself well out there. Kept him talking, kept calm. I was terrified, she admitted. That's what courage is, Wyatt said softly. Doing what needs doing even when you're scared. They stood close, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through them, creating an almost palpable connection. Harriet was acutely aware of the rise and fall of Wyatt's chest, the intensity in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that betrayed how afraid he had been for her. I need to check on the children, she said, though she made no move to leave. They're fine, he assured her. Foster will bring them out now that it's safe. Wyatt, she began, uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions his presence, his protection, his unwavering support had awakened in her. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Harriet, he replied, his voice deepening. Everything I've done has been because. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision, squaring his shoulders. Because I love you. The simple declaration, spoken without artifice or calculation, stole her breath. Wyatt. I know it's too soon, he continued, words coming faster now. I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past days facing danger together, seeing your courage, your kindness, they've shown me what kind of woman you are. And I love you, Harriet Jenkins. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I put my jacket around your shoulders and promised you were safe." Tears pricked Harriet's eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so unexpected and complete that it overwhelmed her. In that moment, with the sun setting behind the mountains and the man before her offering his heart with such honest simplicity, she knew her own truth. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right, necessary. "I think I've known it since that night under the stars, when you made me feel safe in a world that had suddenly turned dangerous." Wyatt's face transformed, hope and happiness erasing the strain of the past days. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished, he cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Please do, Mr. Jackson," she replied, returning his smile with one of her own. His lips met hers with gentle reverence, a first kiss that felt both like a beginning and a homecoming. Harriet's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to spin around them. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, the sound of approaching footsteps reminded them that they stood in the middle of the road at the edge of town, in full view of anyone who cared to look. "Miss Jenkins, Mr. Jackson." Deputy Foster called as he approached with the Henderson children. "Everyone all right?" "Just fine, Jim," Wyatt replied, his eyes still on Harriet's face. "Better than fine, actually." The children swarmed around Harriet, full of questions about their grandfather and the excitement they had heard from their hiding place. She assured them that everything was resolved, that their grandfather was being tended to by the doctor and would be fine, and that tomorrow's school day would proceed as normal. As they walked back toward town, the children racing ahead under Foster's watchful eye, Wyatt took Harriet's hand in his. The simple gesture, carried out openly in the light of day, felt more significant than their kiss in some ways, a declaration to anyone who might see that something had changed between the schoolteacher and the rancher. "What happens now?" Harriet asked, not just referring to the immediate future but to the path they had just set foot upon together. Wyatt's fingers tightened around hers. "Now," he said thoughtfully, "we build a life, if that's what you want." The question beneath his words was clear. Was she ready for such a commitment? Did she see her future here with him, in this town that had already given her both terror and joy? Looking ahead to the buildings of Sweetwater Creek, the schoolhouse where she would shape young minds, the mercantile where Martha would undoubtedly be waiting for news, and beyond to the distant hills where Wyatt's ranch stood ready to welcome them both, Harriet felt a certainty settle over her like a warm blanket. "That's exactly what I want," she said, squeezing his hand in return. "A life here with you." The smile that broke across Wyatt's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then that's what we'll have," he promised, "starting right now." And as they walked toward town, hand in hand in the golden light of evening, Harriet Jenkins, once a lonely schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, now a woman who had found her courage, her purpose, and her heart in the wilds of Colorado, knew that she had indeed written her own story. And it was only just beginning. Epilogue: 1 year later, the autumn afternoon was perfect, crisp air scented with pine, golden aspens shimmering in the breeze, and clear blue skies stretching from horizon to horizon. On the grassy knoll overlooking the Jackson Ranch, a small gathering had assembled for a ceremony both simple and profound. Harriet stood before Pastor Williams, her hand clasped in Wyatt's, hardly believing that a year had passed since she had first arrived in Sweetwater Creek. The blue dress she had worn that day was long gone, replaced today by a wedding gown of ivory silk, Martha's gift, ordered specially from Denver. Do you, Wyatt James Jackson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Pastor Williams asked, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled guests. I do, Wyatt replied, his eyes never leaving Harriet's face. And do you, Harriet Ann Jenkins, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she said, her heart so full she wondered it didn't burst from her chest. Then by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The pastor beamed at them. You may kiss your bride, Wyatt. The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying a promise of deeper intimacies to come. When they turned to face their friends, Harriet was struck anew by how many people had gathered to witness their union, nearly the entire town of Sweetwater Creek, it seemed. Martha stood closest, tears glistening in her usually practical eyes. Beside her, Tom Perkins beamed with satisfaction, his arm around Mrs. Henderson, whose husband had recovered fully from his ordeal and now stood proudly with their grandchildren. Sheriff Burke and Deputy Foster represented law and order, while Charlie, now Wyatt's foreman, led the contingent from the ranch. And filling out the gathering were Harriet's students and their families, all come to celebrate the marriage of their beloved teacher. The reception that followed was a joyful affair, with tables set up in the yard of the ranch house, food prepared by every household in town, and music provided by local fiddle players. As the afternoon mellowed into evening, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the celebration. Happy Mrs. Jackson? Wyatt asked, finding Harriet at the edge of the gathering, taking a moment to herself. Deliriously so, Mr. Jackson, she replied, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their guests enjoy the festivities. Martha was dancing with Tom Perkins, their friendship having deepened into something more over the past year. The Henderson grandchildren played tag around the yard with their schoolmates. Sheriff Burke told stories to a rapt audience of ranchers. Hard to believe it's been a year, Harriet mused. So much has changed. Indeed it had. The schoolhouse had flourished under her guidance, expanding to accommodate more students as word spread of the quality of education available in Sweetwater Creek. The town itself had grown, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the valley. Ralph Connolly was serving a long sentence in the territorial prison, his threats nothing more than a distant memory. The stagecoach robbery that had brought Harriet and Wyatt together now seemed like something from another lifetime. And their relationship had blossomed from that first desperate meeting into a partnership of equals, Harriet continuing to teach while helping Wyatt expand his horse breeding operation. Wyatt supporting her educational innovations while building them a larger house on the ranch property. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, noting her contemplative expression. "That night by the stagecoach," she admitted. "How terrified I was, how humiliated when my dress was torn. And then you appeared like something from a dream and put your jacket around my shoulders." She looked up at him, love warming her gaze. "You told me I was safe and somehow I believed you." "Best thing I ever did," he said, pulling her closer, "finding you that night." "I think perhaps we found each other," Harriet suggested, remembering how lost she had felt after her parents' deaths, how adrift Wyatt had been in his own way. "And now we've found home." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Home isn't just a place," he said softly. "It's where you're safe to be yourself, to love and be loved in return." "Very poetic, Mr. Jackson," she teased, though her eyes shone with emotion. "Did you learn that from one of my books?" "Learned it from you," he countered, bending to kiss her again, oblivious to the knowing smiles of their guests. "Every day with you teaches me something new." As the fiddles struck up another tune and the celebration continued around them, Harriet and Wyatt Jackson stood together on the land they shared, surrounded by the community that had embraced them, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future might bring, they would face it as they had faced every challenge since that night by the stagecoach together, with courage and with love. And Harriet, who had once journeyed west seeking only employment and independence, had found something far more precious: a home, a purpose, and a love story written not in the pages of the books she treasured, but in the reality of a life fully lived and a heart fully given. It was a story that had begun with fear and a torn dress, with a cowboy's jacket and a simple promise of safety. And it was a story that would continue, day by day and year by year, as rich and enduring as the Colorado landscape that had brought them together.